Welcome back to our channel, everyone. Imagine waking up on your 65th birthday only to find your son and his fiancée demanding you either serve them or surrender your entire life savings. Would you choose submission or sweet revenge? Today's story will reveal how our brave heroine, Adriana Prescott, turned the tables in the most satisfying way imaginable. Trust me, you'll never guess how her story ends. Listen to the full story to find out exactly what she did, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to support our channel and keep up with more amazing stories just like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below with your personal opinions and tell me where you're listening from. They ambushed me on my 65th birthday, my only son and the woman clinging to his arm, telling me with straight faces that I was either going to serve them like a live-in maid or resign myself to a low-budget nursing home. Yes, you read that correctly. My name is Adriana Prescott, and until that unholy morning, I thought I knew what motherhood was supposed to be. I believed in loyalty, in the timeless duty of caring for one's child. What I never foresaw was watching my own flesh and blood stand in my living room, telling me I was too old to keep my house and my savings. His exact words spelled out in slow clarity. "Sign it all over, Mom. If you won't live by our rules, there's a retirement facility with your name on it." I should have screamed. I should have begged. But the strangest thing happened. A kind of calmness fell over me. I felt my lips curl into a smile I didn't recognize. Right then and there, I decided to walk away from them and claim the best revenge I could muster, living my remaining years in absolute luxury, without ever lifting a finger for their sake again. After decades of sacrificing everything for Lionel, my only son, I was done. Let me explain how we got here, for it wasn't always so grim. Lionel, from the moment he was placed in my arms, seemed like a miracle. My late husband Gilbert and I were late bloomers in parenthood. We poured every ounce of love, time, and resources into ensuring our boy would want for nothing. He was bright, charming, even sweet at times, but somewhere along the line, something shifted in him. Some vile entitlement bloomed. He grew into a man who equated my net worth with free currency. He married, or, to be precise, became engaged to Celeste, a pregnant fiancée with a hungry eye for comfort. And so, the worst day of my life began when I discovered that, to them, I was simply an old doormat to be pushed aside or exploited. But as you'll see, I fought back in the most satisfying way imaginable. If you're out there listening, do drop a comment. Comment 1 if you're cheering for me already, or 2 if you think you'd have handled it differently. I'd love to know where you stand. After all, sometimes the best twist in life is to cut your losses early and find your own happiness, no matter what anyone else thinks. Before the fiasco, I'd been planning a small celebration for my 65th birthday. Just a quiet dinner at my home, the bungalow I had shared with Gilbert for more than 3 decades. The cozy place had grown older with me, creaking floors, memory-packed wallpaper, and carefully maintained flower beds in the backyard. I wasn't looking for a grand party, simply a small chance to reconnect with Lionel over a home-cooked meal. I made my famous roast chicken with lemon and herbs, a dish he used to love as a boy. I even included a side of herbed rice and green beans, lightly sautéed in olive oil. The house smelled of warmth and nostalgia, the table set with silverware that once belonged to my mother. On the countertop was a simple chocolate cake, big enough for 3 slices. Myself, Lionel, and hopefully Celeste if she came with him. I remember glancing at the clock. It was well past 7:30. Lionel had promised to drop by around 7, but there was no text or phone call. In my old lady mind, I began rationalizing. Maybe traffic is bad, or he's running a bit late. My heart was fluttery with the hope of a pleasant surprise. As time dragged on, though, the excitement in me faded, replaced by an odd sense of dread. My life had been so full of waiting recently, waiting for Lionel to call, waiting for him to visit, waiting for him to show he cared about this house as much as I did. Finally, at 8:30, the door opened. Lionel strolled in, reeking of cologne and cigarettes. He wasn't alone. Celeste followed in behind him. I'd never met her in person until that moment. She had glossy brown hair, done in overly voluminous waves, and wore a flashy outfit that was, truthfully, a little tight around her pregnant belly. Her lips were turned in a smirk, her eyes scanning my living room like she was mentally refurnishing it. That's when it happened. Right away, Lionel announced they were expecting and that the two of them had decided I was perfectly free to move in with them, or, better yet, to get out and let them have the house and my bank account. The blatant arrogance stunned me. In that charged moment, it became painfully obvious. All they saw when they looked at me was an obstacle to their plans or a source of wealth to drain. If you're still with me, comment 1 if you think I should have thrown them out on the spot, or 2 if you'd have heard them out a bit longer. It's hard to know what to do when your own flesh and blood corners you like that. But trust me, sometimes the right choice is the bold one. I recall the strange out-of-body sensation as Celeste draped herself over Lionel's arm, tapping at her pregnant belly and complaining that she needed me to help care for our baby when the time came. She spoke like I had no other role in life but to fetch, carry, cook, and babysit. It was as though I had no mind, no dreams, no identity beyond servant mother. The last vestige of warmth I felt for Lionel chilled in that moment. The baby's presence tugged at me. I'd always adored children, but I couldn't deny the manipulative undertone in her voice. After a few minutes of forced pleasantries, Celeste wrinkled her nose at the food I'd so carefully prepared. She deemed it too strong-smelling for her delicate cravings. Lionel barely glanced at the table before shrugging and saying, "Mom, can you whip something else up?" Celeste has been super picky since the pregnancy started. I stood there, hands trembling slightly at the edges. This was supposed to be my birthday dinner, yet they both ignored that detail like an inconvenient afterthought. I quickly realized the situation was more dire than simple disregard. Lionel's talk turned to my savings, how they would be put to better use if he managed them, how it was time I recognized he was the rightful successor to all I had. Listening to my own child talk like a crook trying to con an old lady out of her pension jar, it nearly broke me. But something else took root in my chest that day. A resolute certainty that it was time for me to live my own life. That night, after they stomped off to bed in one of the guest rooms, yes, ironically, they'd settled in as though the house was already theirs, I made a phone call to Highcliffe Estate. It was the city's most luxurious senior living residence, pristine gardens, private suites, gourmet dining, the works. I'd researched it before, but never with a serious plan to move in. On that night, however, I made the call with unwavering determination. Midway through explaining my request, it struck me how calm I sounded. I'd like the premium independent living suite, paid for at least 20 years in advance, I told the startled admissions officer. When she asked if I wanted my son as the emergency contact, I simply replied, "No, I don't have any family available. If you're still watching, let me know where you're from." I've discovered, in my newfound independence, that reaching people from across the globe is a small marvel. Maybe you've been through something similar. If so, you'll know there's a steep price to freedom, but it's often worth every cent. The next morning, a strange hush draped itself over the house. Lionel and Celeste didn't wake until nearly noon. I was in the garden by then, clipping wilted blooms from the roses that Gilbert and I once planted. Those rose bushes had weathered storms, cold snaps, and scorching summers. They endured far more elegantly than I felt capable of. Through all my heartbreak, the garden remained a place of solace. But solace was short-lived. When I returned inside, I found Celeste rummaging through my kitchen cabinets. She had already tossed aside my carefully arranged herb jars and recipe books. "We need to update everything in here," she said, rubbing her belly. "A modern kitchen for the baby's sake." Lionel was at the dining table, fiddling with his phone. When he saw me, he offered me a wan smile and demanded I brew him some coffee. "I'm exhausted," he drawled, as if that excused it. I quietly began washing the dishes from my own abandoned birthday meal. I looked at the once warm casserole and soup, now cold and congealed, and realized in a moment of clarity, this house isn't a home to them. It's a resource. They intended to nest here until they could squeeze me out, or so they thought. They had no inkling of my phone call the night before, my arrangement with Highcliffe Estate, or my new plan to protect what was rightfully mine. It was then that I dialed another number. Marta, my longtime housekeeper, who had served me faithfully until Lionel dismissed her under the guise of budget cuts. Marta was more than staff. She was a friend who'd known me since Lionel was a toddler. Upon hearing my voice, she came rushing back that very day, tears brimming in her eyes, exclaiming how she always prayed I was doing fine. Celeste didn't take Marta's arrival well, of course. She rolled her eyes and muttered about unnecessary expenses. But Marta seemed unbothered. She marched into the kitchen, rolled up her sleeves, and promptly began restoring some order. For dinner, she prepared a hearty beef stew and vegetable soup, my old favorites. The aroma filled the entire house. When Lionel slunk in, nostrils flaring, he muttered something about the smell. Marta reminded him gently but firmly that he used to adore this meal as a boy. Pause here for a quick question. Do you think Marta was brave, or do you feel like she could have done even more to stand up to Celeste? Let me know. Sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to see the cracks forming in our family. That night, an inevitable confrontation took place at the dinner table. Lionel, spoiling for a fight, asked Marta why she'd returned. She stared at him, this boy she'd once cradled while I worked late nights, her expression stony. "I was asked to come back," she said, "and this time I answer only to your mother." Celeste, obviously fed up with all mention of my house or my rules, snapped, "Well, if there's so much money to hire staff, maybe that budget is better spent on the baby. It's outrageous to maintain a full-time housekeeper in this economy." Marta's response was swift. "Ma'am, the only outrage is how you're treating Adriana, the rightful owner of this place." She then turned away, focusing on serving me the stew, pointedly ignoring Celeste's open-mouthed indignation. Lionel, meanwhile, tried to steer the conversation back to his vision for the property. He had the gall to mention wanting to liquidate certain assets. That's code for sell the house, if you ask me. He started rattling off ideas about flipping the place or using it as collateral for some new business venture. My blood pressure spiked. I could almost see Celeste mentally calculating how many zeros might appear in her checking account if they convinced me to hand everything over. I took a deep breath, determined not to lose my composure. "You're both free to live your lives as you see fit," I said evenly. "But you will not decide what happens to this home, nor to my savings. I'm still alive, in case you've forgotten." Lionel's voice rose in frustration. "What's the point of clinging to a big house you can't manage alone? You're older now, Mom. You can't expect to do everything by yourself." His tone suggested I was some doddering old woman who could barely tie her shoes, let alone manage an estate. That's when I informed them of my decision. "You'll both have to find somewhere else to stay, effective immediately. I have plans to move out myself, and I won't be leaving you the keys or the bank codes." You should have seen their faces, like two actors whose scripts had suddenly vanished. If this moment intrigues you, comment 1 if you think it's about time they faced consequences, or 2 if you still believe family ties can be saved. Opinions might vary, but for me, the countdown to a new life had already begun. The days that followed were a bizarre limbo. Celeste, anger radiating from her in toxic waves, tried to mark her territory as though refusing to accept that she might actually have to leave. She redecorated the living room, pinning baby shower invitations on my corkboard, scattering plush toys around as if to claim the space. She whined incessantly about the stress of living under the same roof with someone who wasn't supportive. Lionel's reaction was somewhat more nuanced. He spent hours on phone calls in my study, a place he'd once used to do his high school assignments. Now he used it to contact banks, potential investors, and whomever he could beg or cajole into giving him money. I listened from the other side of the door, hearing the tension in his voice. More often than not, he ended those calls by slamming the phone down. To be honest, there was a part of me that pitied him. He sounded cornered, like a man who'd burned all his safety nets and was now dangling over a pit. But pity doesn't erase betrayal, and betrayal was precisely what he served up on my birthday. Meanwhile, my personal tasks turned urgent. Highcliffe Estate had assigned me a transition team, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Fletcher, and two young men who packed with remarkable efficiency. They arrived discreetly, bundling up my personal items, photo albums, sentimental knickknacks, my winter coat, and a stack of diaries I'd kept since I was a teenager. Lionel and Celeste didn't quite grasp the significance at first, but when they saw Ms. Fletcher carrying out box after box, they realized I was serious. One evening, while the team busied themselves, Lionel cornered me in the hallway. "Mom, you can't just walk out," he hissed, trying to moderate his voice so the neighbors wouldn't hear. "We're your family." I gazed into his eyes, searching for the boy he used to be. "I gave you a chance to stay here, Lionel, but on my terms," I replied softly. "You made it clear you weren't interested in respecting me or my home." He started to say something else, but the words died in his throat. For the first time, I glimpsed genuine fear on his face, fear that I was truly gone from his life. That night, Marta and I finished packing the last of my clothes, and I slept easier knowing I'd soon be free. If you've ever had to cut someone toxic out of your life, family or not, drop a comment and share your experience. It's not always easy, but sometimes it's the only path forward. At exactly 10 a.m. the next morning, the Highcliffe Estate van pulled up to my front gate. Ms. Fletcher and her assistants wasted no time. In a matter of hours, they moved my belongings, tidied any remaining loose ends, and officially checked me into my new residence. The house I had loved for so long suddenly felt like an empty stage set, with the final act concluding. I remember the final look Lionel gave me from the top of the stairs as I walked out. His eyes were wide, his lips parted as though he wanted to call out. Celeste was behind him, wearing a robe and glaring daggers. But I didn't pause to exchange any last words. I simply left. Highcliffe Estate was more beautiful than I'd imagined. Located on a gentle hillside, it featured expansive flower gardens, a crystal-clear pond at its center, and elegantly designed buildings where each resident had a spacious private suite. My suite offered a small balcony overlooking a row of willow trees. There was a comfortable sitting area, a kitchenette I could use if I ever felt like cooking, and a bedroom large enough for a queen-sized bed, plus a cozy reading nook. Shortly after settling in, I met with the estate's lifestyle coordinator, who gave me a brochure detailing various activities: art classes, meditation sessions, book clubs, gardening circles. For a moment, my throat tightened, realizing how little time I'd spent on hobbies in the past. My entire life, it seemed, had revolved around caring for Lionel and, when he was alive, Gilbert. But now these possibilities lay open, beckoning me to explore who I was beyond my roles as wife and mother. By late afternoon, I found myself in the estate's tea room, sipping a herbal infusion while gazing out at the manicured lawns. The calmness of it all was surreal. No shouting, no demands, no guilt. I was free to think about my own future, even if it was decades overdue. A quick check in. Comment 1 if you'd embrace retirement living fun, or 2 if you think you'd keep working on a side hustle. I find a bit of both might be the perfect blend. One can discover new passions at any age. For the first week at Highcliffe, I kept expecting a phone call or a text from Lionel. Part of me was braced for an apology, or maybe even an angry tirade. Instead, there was silence. At first, it felt unnerving. Then it felt oddly peaceful. I realized how tired I was, tired of carrying a mother's burden for a son who refused to grow up. I took advantage of the estate's amenities. I joined a small group of residents in a watercolor painting class. My brushstrokes were shaky at first, but the instructor insisted that the point wasn't perfection, it was expression. I painted a rough garden scene, reminiscent of the roses at my old home, and when I finished, my heart actually felt lighter. It was the first time in years I'd felt an emotional release that didn't revolve around someone else's demands. Later, I spent hours walking around the estate, discovering hidden nooks, a miniature library stocked with classics, a lounge where a group of retired musicians often performed live jazz, and a cozy greenhouse brimming with orchids and succulents. Every discovery reminded me that my life didn't have to end at 65. In fact, it could begin anew. Marta kept me updated on the situation at the house. She and a few close friends of mine took on partial ownership of the property, my final gift to them for their years of loyalty. Lionel's confusion turned to rage when he learned the title no longer had his name attached. He tried to borrow against it, only to find out he wasn't the legal owner. Creditors sniffed around, but they left empty-handed. I had effectively cut every financial tie and placed all my assets into a trust for my long-term care, plus a philanthropic fund to support young artists, something I'd always dreamed of doing. The shock must have rattled Lionel to his core. He couldn't threaten me anymore. He had no hold over me, no caretaker role to dangle, no emotional blackmail to leverage. And that was exactly how I wanted it, a clean slate. Where do you stand on my decision so far? Share a quick thought. Was it a stroke of genius, or did I go too far? Real life decisions can be messy, and it's okay to have doubts. But let me tell you, I've never slept better than I did that first week at Highcliffe. Yet peace wasn't the only thing I found. I also rediscovered my own ambition. Decades ago, before marriage and motherhood, I was an aspiring art historian. Gilbert and I met in a university library, both with big plans and starry eyes. Life took us on a different path, of course, but the love for art had never quite died in me. It was like an ember that glowed under a pile of ash, waiting for the right breeze to reignite. Highcliffe Estate gave me that breeze. I spent hours in the facility's mini gallery, examining paintings and sculptures donated by local artists. The estate occasionally hosted art events, and I saw so many talented individuals lacking only the resources to gain a broader audience. That's when it clicked. The philanthropic fund I'd set up in my trust. Why not channel it into a formal foundation that would sponsor emerging artists? I could provide scholarships, fund exhibitions, and maybe even partner with local cultural institutions. This idea sent a current of excitement through me. I approached the estate's director, who graciously directed me to an experienced financial consultant. Within days, we had the outlines of a formal nonprofit foundation dedicated to supporting underprivileged and talented artists. We called it the Prescott Art Initiative. After all, my maiden name was Prescott, and I wanted a new legacy for the world to remember me by, not just Lionel's mother. News of my philanthropic plans unexpectedly reached old acquaintances in the local art scene. One museum curator, an old friend of Gilbert's, reached out with an invitation to a private gallery. Word spread that I was pouring resources into discovering the next wave of painters, sculptors, and performers. The more I dived into it, the more alive I felt. I wasn't just donating money, I was curating a future for creative souls who might otherwise be overshadowed by financial constraints. Then, almost as if on cue, Lionel re-emerged, not physically, but in fleeting whispers. Mutual contacts reported that he was struggling with debts, that Celeste had left him, and that he was frantic to secure a loan. He tried to wave my old name around, claiming he had access to family funds, but I had severed that cord too, and banks slammed their doors in his face. A moment to reflect. Comment 1 if you think my philanthropic route is a beautiful second act, or 2 if you believe I should have held onto my finances more privately. Either way, I'm grateful to find purpose. Because money by itself is hollow, but used well, it can become a source of hope. Weeks turned into a month, and Highcliffe Estate started to feel like home. My suite, once bare, became filled with sketches and paintings from local up-and-comers I supported. I had a modest schedule. Some days I'd host morning coffee gatherings for fellow residents, and in the afternoons, I'd meet with the philanthropic board I was forming. Each morning I woke up, I felt a surge of gratitude, a sense that I was precisely where I needed to be. In those early weeks, Marta would call me regularly with updates on the old house. She told me how the rose garden flourished under her supervision and how the kitchen sparkled with new life. It became a communal gathering place for the staff and close friends who inherited partial ownership. They even started a small vegetable patch, which was something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. Hearing that made my heart swell. The house sounded more vibrant than it had been in years. Maybe it needed me gone to truly breathe again. Then Marta mentioned Lionel had shown up at the gates, demanding to be let in. He was shocked to find the locks changed and the new owners unimpressed by his tantrums. He threatened legal action, Marta told me, but we reminded him he voluntarily left and never had any legal claim. According to her, he left swearing he'd come back with lawyers. So far, that threat remained empty. It occurred to me that maybe, just maybe, I needed some kind of closure with Lionel. I wasn't naive enough to think an apology would fix everything, but a small part of me wondered if we could ever speak again without bitterness. However, I vowed not to call him first. Let him find his own path, if he even wanted one that didn't involve stepping on me. If you're still tuned in, let me know. 1. If you believe I should never forgive him. 2. If you believe redemption is possible. Families are complicated. I had a swirl of conflicting emotions, but for now, the peace I'd found was too precious to risk. On the morning of my 65th birthday, I received the most outrageous gift of my life. My son, the boy I had raised and sacrificed for over the decades, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You should move into a retirement home. Leave the house and the money to me." I didn't argue. I didn't shed a tear. I simply smiled, walked into the city's most luxurious senior residence, and signed the admission papers. That same day, I finalized a trust to cut him off completely. No more access to my assets and not a shred of pity left for him. Without me, his world crumbled overnight. As for me, my real life began the moment I closed that door behind me. Once I had that trust finalized, everything accelerated. Looking back, it's astonishing how quickly one can transform an entire life when truly determined. Meanwhile, Lionel's downfall appeared to be equally swift. Rumor had it he'd been gambling to try and make a quick score, probably to secure a chunk of money he once took for granted. Debts piled up, and no well-connected friends wanted to bail him out. On top of that, Celeste vanished. Marta later confirmed that Celeste had hopped on a plane to live with relatives in a nicer part of town, likely hoping to pin child support on Lionel once the baby arrived. I'd think about that sometimes. My grandchild, out there in the world, potentially never knowing me. The knowledge stung, but not enough to pull me back into that toxic dynamic. I couldn't let potential guilt unravel my newfound life. If anything, it fueled my resolve to stay firm, to demonstrate that some lines can't be crossed without consequence. Meanwhile, the Prescott Art Initiative was blossoming. We received proposals from high school art teachers who needed funding, from struggling adult artists who'd been forced to work two-day jobs, and from small community theaters that wanted to stage their next performance. Reviewing each request felt like rummaging through a treasure chest of hope. So many dreams just waiting for the right moment. I approved grants left and right, trusting my team to handle the formalities. The sense of empowerment was exhilarating. One afternoon, I received a phone call from John Alcott, the curator of a local museum. He proposed a collaboration, a special exhibit featuring new talents the initiative had sponsored. He wanted me to be the guest of honor at the launch. The invitation felt surreal. Me, a 65-year-old retiree on a new path, being called a patron of the arts? I accepted with a lump in my throat, realizing that Lionel's rejection of me had opened a window I never knew existed. By the way, if you followed along this far, comment 1 to cheer on the art exhibit, or 2 if you'd be anxious to be a guest of honor. For me, it was a liberating moment, proof that it's never too late to claim your place in the world. The exhibit day arrived with unexpected pomp. A red ribbon was stretched across the museum's entrance, and a small local newspaper sent a reporter to cover the event. I wore a simple navy blue dress paired with a pearl necklace, a memento from Gilbert, back when we were newlyweds. The place buzzed with energy. Paintings, sculptures, and multimedia pieces from over a dozen emerging artists filled the airy gallery. Each piece bore a small placard, sponsored by the Prescott Art Initiative. I walked among the displays, speaking with the artists, some wide-eyed teenagers, some middle-aged dreamers who had finally found a platform. A sense of quiet pride washed over me, imagining that maybe, in another timeline, I could have been one of them. But regrets didn't last long. I was here now, supporting them in the best way I could. Midway through the event, as I was in conversation with an artist named Lucy, who specialized in abstract watercolors, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning around, I found Lionel standing behind me. His hair was disheveled, his eyes sunken, and he wore a suit that had seen better days. A wave of conflicting emotions threatened to drown me. I swallowed hard, inhaled, and asked, "What are you doing here?" He shuffled his feet. "I heard about the exhibit," he murmured. I wanted to see you." The moment felt surreal. Before I could respond, Lucy excused herself, leaving the two of us alone in a corner of the gallery. A tension strangled the air. I braced myself for another barrage of excuses or manipulative pleas for money. But what came out of Lionel's mouth was unexpected. "I'm sorry." That single phrase made me blink in confusion. He went on, explaining how Celeste had left, how he lost his big business break, and how every bank slammed their doors on him. "I messed up," he admitted, "worse than I ever thought I could. I'm not asking for anything, just sorry. If you've ever been blindsided by a genuine apology or an attempt at one, comment 1 if you'd forgive on the spot, or 2 if you'd keep your guard up." Personally, I needed a moment to breathe before deciding how to respond. Lionel's apology landed on me like a drop of water on a hot skillet, hissing, evaporating, leaving behind a faint trace but not enough to saturate. I stared at him, remembering how he used to be as a child, how I once believed he'd grow into a person who valued family more than dollar signs. Perhaps that version of him still existed beneath the reckless greed. "I'm not sure what you expect me to say," I replied softly. My heart clenched at the sight of him looking so worn down. But empathy is not the same as trust, and I'd learned a hard lesson. Trust has to be earned, and re-earned, especially after betrayal. He sighed, eyes downcast. I know you don't owe me anything, he said. I just, he paused as though gathering courage. I wanted you to know I'm done gambling. I found a job at a local warehouse. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. I'm prepared to fix my own mess. Hearing that was unexpected. For years, Lionel had avoided honest labor as though it were beneath him, and now here he stood, humbly admitting he needed to rebuild from scratch. I felt a tiny flutter of relief. Maybe for the first time in a long time, he was telling the truth. I won't stand in your way, I told him. If you're truly serious, then good luck. But I'm not returning to how things used to be. I needed him to understand there was no going back to that old relationship dynamic. He nodded, a tremor in his voice. I get it. I'm not asking for your money. I just want you to know that I see it now, what I've done. His eyes glimmered, perhaps on the verge of tears, but he didn't let them fall. Instead, he forced a small, bitter smile and added, Anyway, congrats on all of this. It looks like you're doing well. And with that, Lionel was gone. He slipped back into the crowd and disappeared into the city night, leaving me with a swirl of emotions I couldn't fully parse. Oddly, I wasn't angry. I felt something akin to closure, though not complete resolution. Where do you stand on apologies? Let me know. Forgiveness can be a process, not a one-time event. Right then, I chose to keep walking around the gallery, greeting artists and burying my anxious heart beneath the warmth of shared creativity. Even after that encounter, life continued at Highcliffe. If there was one lesson I'd learned, it was that healing doesn't hinge on a single dramatic confrontation. Instead, it weaves itself into everyday choices, like deciding to water a plant despite the weather, or to show up for a painting class even when you feel low. Day by day, I discovered more joys in my new routine. I cultivated friendships with several fellow residents. One was Elaine, a retired teacher who adored crocheting baby blankets. Another was Henry, a former jazz musician who still played saxophone in the common room on Thursday nights. My circle expanded to include younger staff members who were curious about art. They'd pop by my suite to see my new acquisitions or to discuss upcoming exhibits. The Prescott Art Initiative kept me busy. We hosted free workshops for kids in underserved neighborhoods, supplied materials for after-school art clubs, and started organizing an annual contest that would offer scholarships for those needing further education. I found myself corresponding with city councils, philanthropic boards, and community leaders. Suddenly, my calendar overflowed with meaningful appointments instead of the dreaded, stifling obligations I once knew. Every so often, Marta would swing by for a visit. She'd bring me fresh tomatoes from the garden at my old house, along with stories of how well things were going there. The communal spirit blossomed in those walls. Neighbors gathering for potlucks, children playing in the yard. It sounded like the perfect second life for the home. And me? I could relish the knowledge that I'd done at least one good thing by leaving it in capable, caring hands. Then, out of the blue, Ms. Fletcher, a key advisor from Highcliffe, knocked on my door one evening. She asked if I might consider giving a public talk about aging with independence. You've had an inspiring transformation, Mrs. Prescott, she said. Our residents could learn a lot from your journey. My mind flashed back to a time I'd have balked at public speaking, but now I felt compelled to share my story. Perhaps it would encourage others to step out of toxic relationships or redefine what it meant to be old. Sound off. 1, if you'd enjoy speaking publicly about your life lessons. 2, if you prefer to keep your private life behind closed doors. I chose to say yes because for the first time in ages, I had a story worth telling on my own terms. The talk was scheduled in Highcliffe's sunlit community hall, which offered rows of plush chairs, a modest stage, and excellent acoustics. Word spread around the estate. And on the day of the event, I was astonished to find a larger crowd than anticipated: residents, staff, even a few visitors from outside. Elaine and Henry sat in the front row, beaming at me with encouragement. Standing at the podium, I looked out at so many different faces. I started with a single question: how many of you have ever been afraid to say no to family? A few hands went up. Others simply nodded, their expressions thoughtful. I admitted I'd been terrified most of my life, believing I owed Lionel unconditional obedience just because he was my son. I explained how I realized, painfully, that unconditional love should not equate to unconditional surrender. I recounted the pivotal scene, the morning of my 65th birthday, Lionel's ultimatum, and my abrupt decision to leave him behind. I described the dread and liberation that fought for space in my heart once I signed on with Highcliffe. And then I spoke about the joys discovered since: the art initiative, the blossoming friendships, the simple thrill of not tiptoeing around someone else's temper. When I finished, the silence felt charged with understanding. A resident in the second row stood up, tears in her eyes, and said, "Thank you. I've spent years feeling guilty about my own daughter's neglect. I thought I was alone." Another resident shared how she'd given too much to a nephew who only called when he wanted money. Each story resonated with heartbreak and hope. We ended with a heartfelt applause, and in that moment, I felt years of shame and fear dissolve. It was as if releasing my story allowed others to unburden themselves, too. We all parted ways that day feeling a little braver. On that note, where are you watching from right now? I hope you find some encouragement in these words. It's never too late to stand up for yourself, even when it feels like everyone else expects you to crumble. Shortly after the talk, I walked through Highcliffe's gardens to clear my head. The air smelled of late summer flowers, dahlias, marigolds, and a few peonies bravely holding on. I reflected on the power of community, how, even at this later stage of life, people could come together and heal wounds inflicted over decades. There was something redemptive about it. Redemption. The word stirred thoughts of Lionel once more. I hadn't heard from him since our brief encounter at the museum exhibit. Was he truly working that warehouse job, or had he slid back into old habits? Part of me hoped he was finding his footing, building a life of integrity, but a larger part still clung to skepticism. When I returned to my suite, Ms. Fletcher greeted me with a letter in her hand. "This arrived for you, Mrs. Prescott," she said with a gentle smile. I took the envelope, noticing Lionel's scrawled handwriting on the front. My chest tightened. Inside was a short letter. He wrote that he'd rented a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, near the warehouse. He admitted it was a far cry from the luxurious life he once thought he deserved, but it was his. He said he was attending a local counseling group for gambling addiction, that he was trying to keep afloat with honest means. Finally, in shaky words, he wrote, "I'm not asking you to come back or to help me. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry and I'm trying." My fingers trembled as I read the last line. Despite everything, I felt a wave of relief. I'd braced myself for a manipulative request. Yet this letter asked for nothing but acknowledgement. Could people change after hitting rock bottom? Possibly. I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box where I kept sentimental items: a pressed flower from my wedding day, a photo strip of me and Gilbert from years back, and a scribbled note Lionel once gave me in grade school for Mother's Day. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to sort through my emotions. 1. If you believe in second chances. 2. If you think I should keep him at arm's length forever. The truth? I was still uncertain, but the idea that Lionel might become a better man on his own effort brought me a quiet sense of hope. Days turned into weeks once more, and in that time, I focused on the expansion of the Prescott Art Initiative. We formed partnerships with local community centers, provided a small scholarship fund for a pair of promising high school seniors, and helped sponsor a weekend art fair. My schedule brimmed with events, calls, and meetings, more lively than it had ever been, even in my younger days. But no matter how busy I got, quiet moments would find me. Late at night, I'd sit on my balcony, staring at the moon's reflection in the estate's pond. Often, I thought about Gilbert. If he were still alive, would we have faced the same heartbreak with Lionel? Probably, but maybe Gilbert's gentle nature could have bridged gaps before they turned into canyons. I let myself miss him without bitterness, grateful that I had known a love that was genuine, if only for part of my life. A month after receiving Lionel's letter, I took a bold step. I dialed the phone number he'd left at the bottom of the page. He answered on the second ring, sounding astonished to hear my voice. Our conversation was brief, tentative. I asked how work was going. He said it was exhausting but honest. He mentioned Celeste hadn't contacted him since she left, and he wasn't sure if he'd ever see the child. Strangely, he didn't blame her. He seemed resigned to the fact that he'd dug his own grave. I ended the call by saying, I don't hate you, Lionel, but I need to live my life. I'm not returning to what we had before. There was a pause on his end. Then he quietly said, I understand. Thank you for calling. We hung up, and I released a breath I didn't know I was holding. I wouldn't call that a victory exactly, but it felt like we'd found a new plateau, one without illusions. And what about you? Comment 1 if you've ever taken a tentative step toward reconciling with someone who hurt you, or 2 if you believe it's better to stay away for good. In my case, a small bridge was forming, but I refused to let it overshadow the life I'd built at Highcliffe. One of the biggest milestones in my journey came when the Prescott Art Initiative hosted a fundraiser at a well-known city venue. Months of preparation led to a night where artists, donors, and well-wishers gathered in a stunning hall lit by chandeliers, with the glow reflecting off curated art pieces that told stories of resilience, dreams, and cultural heritage. I was there to give the opening address, nerves jangling in my stomach. But as I spoke, I spotted kind faces in the crowd. Marta had shown up, looking proud in a simple navy skirt suit. Miss Fletcher was seated at a table near the stage, offering me an encouraging nod. Elaine and Henry from Highcliffe were at another table, both cheering me on in their own quiet ways. It felt like I had a family, though not by blood, by shared values and mutual respect. After the speech, as guests mingled and admired the art, I slipped outside for a breath of fresh air. Standing near a stone balustrade, I spotted Lionel at the edge of the courtyard, hands in his pockets. My heart pounded. I hadn't invited him, but perhaps he'd heard about the event through local news or mutual contacts. He approached slowly, as though afraid to intrude on my moment. I stared at him, taking in his slightly improved appearance, a more presentable outfit, a calmer demeanor, no smell of alcohol or smoke. We spoke briefly. He said, I'm proud of you, glancing at the bright hall behind me. You've built something amazing here. Tears pricked at my eyes despite myself. I thanked him, though I kept my tone measured. Old instincts told me to remain guarded. It was a strange, bittersweet feeling, knowing we might never fully repair our bond, but also glimpsing a truce of sorts. I parted with a simple nod, returning to the fundraiser. He didn't follow me in. Maybe he wasn't ready to step into that circle. Or maybe he knew it was my night and he had no right to overshadow it. If you're still watching, comment 1 if you think Lionel might genuinely be changing, or 2 if you suspect a hidden motive. Cynicism and hope can wage war in the human heart, but for that evening, I decided to embrace the possibility of change. As the evening wound down, the fundraiser proved to be a roaring success. We exceeded our donation goal, ensuring the initiative's programs would continue to thrive for at least another couple of years. Tired but elated, I returned to Highcliffe that night feeling like I'd accomplished something real, something that wasn't just about me escaping my past, but about using my resources to nourish creativity and hope in others. Back in my suite, I kicked off my shoes and wandered to the balcony. The estate grounds were quiet now, illuminated only by soft, warm lights. I realized with a jolt that I'd never been this content in my entire life, not even in my youth. Liberation, purpose, community, these were the pillars of my existence now. And none of it would have been possible if I had bowed to Lionel's ultimatum, continuing to suffocate in a house where I was no longer respected. I can't lie. A part of me still weeps for the family ties left in tatters. But heartbreak can coexist with freedom. As the breeze caressed my face, I closed my eyes and whispered a small prayer of gratitude to Gilbert's memory, to the supportive souls I'd met, and even to the painful lessons that shaped me into someone who finally knew her worth. When dawn broke the next day, I rose early to review the tally from the fundraiser. Smiling at the large sum, I started drafting a list of community art projects we could finance. I even thought about establishing a scholarship in Gilbert's name, maybe for an aspiring painter or sculptor with a vision to transform the world. It felt like a way to keep him alive in the best sense. This is where I'll leave the story, for now. I continue to live at Highcliffe, cherishing every minute. Lionel and I share the occasional phone call, cautious but cordial. I haven't visited the old house again. There's no need to. The garden blooms without me, and I bloom without it. So, if you've journeyed with me this far, comment 1 if you feel this is a perfect ending, or 2 if you still have questions about what comes next. In truth, life never ties itself up neatly. But as I watch the sunrise, I know I've claimed a life of dignity, independence, and yes, a sweet revenge that tastes a lot like freedom. And that's how Adriana Prescott reclaimed her life, found independence, and proved it's never too late for a new beginning. But tell me, what did you think of Adriana's ultimate decision? Did she go too far, or was her revenge just sweet enough? Comment below. I'm eager to hear your take. And if you've enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world and helps me bring you even more captivating stories. Don't forget to let me know where you're listening from. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and remember, sometimes the best chapters of our lives are the ones we least expect.